Okay, we're ready to start.
All righty.
Ready? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another 1 hour edition of the Problem Solvers Forum, a platform where we meet with problem solvers, dot connectors, and entrepreneurs to discuss some of the burning issues of our time in a non-political format. My name is Joe, along with my partner Chris. Today, we're going to be discussing the pharmaceutical industry as it relates to drug development and the importation of drugs in Africa, specifically Liberia. Our guests today, both Liberian Americans, come from two sides of the U.S. pharmaceutical industry. Dr. Harven Deshield, the CEO of Vivacell Bio, comes from the drug discovery and development side of the industry, while Ms. Monica Koenig, the president of Cadence Quality Assurance, hails from the compliance and regulatory enforcement end. She is also a lecturer in regulatory affairs at Purdue University. Monica and Harven, was there anything that I left out of the intro that you would like to emphasize or correct?
Well, I also
All right.
go ahead,
Monica.
Well, you always tell your personal story. Come in.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I consider my background a little bit of a mutt situation. I also worked in R&D on the biotech side. I worked at Mount Sinai Hospital in research and development there for the clotting factors early in my career. This is when I was still in grad school, working on my master's in pharmacology. And so, I have that aspect of things. And I've also, while in the regulatory arena, because of my background, working in compliance, I also worked alongside reviewers when it came to GMPs for IND. So you had to understand the science that goes into drug development to be able to say how and when, the regulatory tools that are used generally in approved finished product manufacturing should apply to drug development. So I kind of straddle a lot of these areas. I have one foot in each of these ponds, if you will.
Right. Okay.
I mean, I'd be fully immersed, but at least I think I'm up to my ankles in some areas.
Okay. So let's start with Dr. Deshield telling us, a bit about his company, Vivacell Bio, a company that's addressing septic shock due to hypovolemia. Is that how they pronounce that, Harvey?
Yeah, absolutely. You got that right.
And of course, he can tell us about himself. But doing a little research, I noticed that in a true entrepreneurial problem-solving move, your company applied for a compassionate use license during COVID. Maybe you could tell us a little about that process, how it panned out. Go ahead, you got the floor, Harvey.
Sure. So the product we have is essentially a platform technology. It's in many cases of shock, the incidence of blood pressure remaining too low, it's a problem. So there's something called the golden hour. It used to be called the golden hour. Now it's called the platinum 10 minutes, right? So essentially from as little as 10 minutes to an hour is very critical to raise the person's blood pressure. So that's that's the main feature that is produced by our product. Our product essentially increases the blood pressure within a very quick time frame when you go into septic shock or shock due to blood loss. So those are the two main indications that we're going after. And there's other things that come about also in addition to when you go into shock, not only does your blood pressure go down, you suffer things with oxygen saturation. So you have in COVID-19 patients, I will segue into that. That was part of the reason we got the compassionate use. It's primarily in COVID-19 patients because it's a viral infection. About 70% of those patients, the cause of death is actually septic shock. A lot of people don't realize that. So most of the COVID-19 patients actually die from septic shock. So that was the basis for getting the compassionate use. In order to get compassionate use, you have to have an active IND filed with the government. So we obviously are conducting a clinical trial in septic shock to treatment of hypovolemia. Hypovolemia means low blood volume, and the low blood volume leads to a drop in the blood pressure. So because we had an active IND, and because the primary indication is to raise blood pressure in septic shock patients, we were able, and low blood pressure is an issue in COVID-19 patients. We were able to get the compassionate use from the government. And we also found that the product unexpectedly improves oxygen saturation. So not only does it, raise the blood pressure, there's instances we've seen consistently that it can have a reasonable impact on oxygen saturation and some other features, interesting features as well. So that's kind of the basis for that. These patients, the oxygen levels is going up and down, and that's one of the struggle with COVID-19 patients. And in our hands, we've seen that the product has the ability to sort of not only stabilize blood pressure, but somehow as a result of doing that, it also seems to affect the stabilization of oxygenation. We have some other theory, hypothesis as to why it does that. Essentially, these phospholipids are basically drugs that are compounds that will absorb oxygen and but not just hold on to it, absorb it and release the oxygen as well. So that's kind of why we think that's why it has a positive impact on oxygen saturation.
And what demographic group actually have that problem, the hypovolemia? It's kind of like when you speak sickle cell, you think about people of African descent. So hypovolemia, is that or that cuts across all the racial groups?
It cuts across all ethnic groups. Yeah, if you lose blood, you go into hypovolemia. So that's low blood volume that then leads to low blood pressure. And there's a connection between, at some point, shock due to low blood volume and shock due to sepsis starts to look the same in terms of this issue. What happens is that you're producing something called nitric oxide in excess. So there's too much of this gas being produced, and that nitric oxide will basically dilate your blood vessels. So if it dilates your blood vessels too much, then your blood pressure is going to drop. Now, it's called the molecule of life because we need it. It's what keeps you from having strokes, right? It keeps your blood vessels open so that ordinarily you want your blood vessels to remain open. Nitric oxide is primarily responsible for doing that. But like everything else, too much of a good thing is exactly. So you're going to septic, and you're going to septic shock or shock due to blood loss, which is called hemorrhagic shock. You have this excessive amounts of nitric oxide being produced. Now, instead of being a good thing, it becomes a bad thing. So people have tried to get rid of it by scavenging it and just holding on to it. That's not a good process because then you're affecting the normal, right? You gotta find a way to kind of, it's like a gradient. You want to redistribute it. You don't really want to just soak it up and hold on to it like a sponge. And some previous products sort of did that and they became toxic. So our product kind of has the ability to just redistribute the nitric oxide. So that's you guys have that problem in both shock tube. Yeah.
Are you guys?
So it's a common problem in both of these types. Yes, we're almost halfway done with the first clinical trial, the phase 2. It's a phase 2. We were allowed to skip phase 1 because of the safety of these phospholipids. So we were allowed to skip phase 1 and start a phase 1. We're about halfway through the phase 2 right now.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Interesting.
Where we are.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Monica, you've got a pretty good grasp of the African pharmaceutical landscape. I mean, you studied that pharmaceutical theater where the concept of regulations and compliance are few and far between, where 42% of the fake drugs in the world are dumped. What's your current assessment of that situation? Monica, can you hear me?
Still, for some reason.
Can you hear me, Monica? Yeah, look like. Okay.
Yeah, it looks like she's still. It looks like
Okay.
it's frozen. Something.
Okay. Yeah, Monica, look like you have to come back in, I guess. But you heard the question from Monica, Harven.
Yeah, let me take a shot. Let me take a
Yeah,
shot
take a shot at it, and then
at it,
she'll
and
come
then she
in
can clean up
once
after me.
she.
She'll come up and clean up after me. So essentially, the issue of fake drugs, right, and how to address that. That is that what they mean? So that it's like you said, about 45% of the drugs in the world that are considered fake, at least by those that report it, comes from Africa.
Yeah.
And so you can see how that could be a problem. And people are trying to address this by it's been suggested that we should sort of have like QR codes. So basically you have a certificate that comes with each package of the drug.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you have it insisting on some kind of that you have that some kind of you have it embedded in the papers that come with the drug package, and such that the pharmacies can then validate the origin of manufacture of the drug. That's kind of it will be able to sort of authenticate that particular package if you had some sort of QR code embedded. So that's one of the things. Obviously, they have these sort of compliance where they run with Interpol, and from time to time you see that they do seize about hundreds of tons. So that has improved also. Across countries, including Liberia, you would find sometimes 20 tons. I think across three in Ivory Coast alone, one time they got something like 400 tons, if you can believe that.
Wow.
These fake drugs. Yeah, so they, in Liberia and along with Ghana and I think Ivory Coast, on one instance, they got something like 30 tons. So they do have that in place, but the problem is the borders are too porous. That's the primary reason. And people, can just come over the border. We don't have that much security there, so even so that makes it a challenge. If as far as trying to solve it, if let's say you have these certificates and you are able to institute measures at at all the pharmacies, for example, let either the LMHRA, which is the regulatory agency in Liberia, let's say, can send people, personnel, inspectors to each of those pharmacies and train those people.
Can you hear me,
and also
Joe?
insist on
Clearly.
the package.
Okay.
That could be one way, at least for the pharmacies. All right.
Okay. Well, the question was for you.
So I heard some of what Harven had to say, and that's something that. So to frame this a little better, to understand that counterfeiting and fake drugs is not just a problem for Africa, right? It's a problem.
You sound so much like Harven.
It's a problem that the whole world has faced, right? In the U.S. and working here in the U.S. Everything that you can imagine, there's a fake for. And so if you're getting fake sneakers and you're getting fake purses and luggage and whatnot, it doesn't matter that much. But when you're getting fake drugs, it matters quite a bit, because, every drug that is taken for a purpose, and some are more important than others. So when you think in terms of someone taking a drug, an antibiotic, and that antibiotic has no active or very minimal active in it, that means the infection continues to rage in their body. Or depending on if it's a low-grade infection, it might end up getting drug resistance, because now, you're introducing the bacteria, because the bacteria and viruses, their job is to survive.
Right.
That's what they're built to do. And so if you're not giving them the optimal drug, then that's why we have so much with COVID right now. That's why we have all these variants. And it's like, why is this happening? It's like, well, the viruses, that's their job. That's what they're just doing what viruses do. They're hanging out and trying to survive. And we're making it easier for them because we're providing the opportunity for them. So you fast forward now. So if you think about the West and all of the things that they have in place, all of the tools that they have in their toolbox,